If you have ever played sports before, you've probably been in a situation where even if you did not act on it, you had the urge to fight. Even outside of sports, most of us have probably had a situation where our temper almost got the better of us. However, I imagine, and certainly hope, that none of you have ever been in a minute-long 20-person brawl. But this is exactly what happened on January 21st at the Kansas State men's basketball game. In this speech, I will inform you on the event and then examine both mainstream and college media for any bias. This fight shows how we can let our tempers get the better of us, and even if you're not a sports fan, it is still a captivating subject. I saw this brawl just minutes after it happened, followed the sports coverage of it that night and the following day, and I've spent extensive time researching the subject so I have a full understanding of the event. First, we'll look at several sources to paint a full picture of what happened, and then examine these sources for a surprising level of bias in such a simple, non-political story. Unfortunately, my PowerPoint did not want to work today, so I did not have a visual aid. Of course, we should first need to start by getting some information on what happened. On January 21st, at the end of the Kansas State men's basketball game, the Kansas Jayhawks were up by 20 points and were just trying to dribble the clock out. However, Kansas State player Dijon Gordon stole the ball and attempted to shoot and score it. This resulted in Kansas forward Sylvia De Sosa blocking Gordon emphatically and then standing over him, taunting him on the ground. This led to a reaction by several Kansas State players to run over and attack De Sosa, which led to every member of both teams going onto the court and having a fight, which spilled into the stands, had several players throw punches at each other, and at one point an assistant coach had to stop De Sosa from swinging a chair at a Kansas State player. According to Amir Vera, reporter for CNN, the fight took around 30 seconds to fully calm down. This fight resulted in several suspensions, most notably 12-game suspension for De Sosa and an 8-game suspension for Kansas State player James Love, as reported by Dean Bayline at the Washington Post. Now that we know what happened, let's look at the media coverage of this event. This event happened on January 21st, and almost every major sports news outlet had a story that night, such as Wild Brawl erupts at the end of Kansas State rivalry game by USA Today sports reporter Jace Evans. Also, many mainstream media outlets had a report on this by that night, such as Kansas and Kansas State basketball game ends an all-out brawl by CNN reporter Amir Vera. Additionally, both Kansas and Kansas State college papers had a story out the next day. Now we'll look at some similarities and differences in their reporting. Each news source reported that the act which triggered the fight was De Sosa's block and taunting on Gordon. A source also mentioned that every player except the 5 that had to remain on the court to finish the game were ejected. However, Kansas State's paper, The Collegian, left out any quotes from after the game. Instead, Andrew Lind of The Collegian reported that no major comments were made by either head coach, only explaining that each team's actions were disappointing. But all my other sources included at least one quote from after the game. CNN reported that Kansas State player Dijon Gordon had attempted to score after a fast break, while Jace Evans of USA Today said that Gordon had stripped the Jayhawks player in midcourt. Now that we know what was reported and the similarities and differences in this reporting, we can look at any bias. First, we'll start with an example of minor bias by CNN leaving out the detail that Gordon stole the ball in midcourt in the final seconds of the game. This was something USA Today, The Collegian, and the University Daily Kansan all included. This shows a slight bias towards Kansas State by CNN. However, I researched if there would be any reason why there would be a bias by CNN towards Kansas State, and I could not find any reason for this. USA Today and the University Daily Kansan had no bias in their reporting, with USA Today including quotes of both coaches taking the blame, and Jack Johnson of the University Daily Kansan included a quote of his own coach Bill Self saying, "I know that we were in the wrong." However, this brings us to Kansas State paper, The Collegian, which was heavily biased. As I previously stated, The Collegian left out any quote from after the game. They also failed to mention that Kansas was attempting to run out the clock at the end of the game. Andrew Lynn of The Collegian simply said of the steal in the block that all of this is fairly normal, and focused only on the Kansas players taunting. This shows a heavy bias by the Collegian towards Kansas State, and while this is not surprising, since it is Kansas State's college newspaper, it is still disappointing. Whether you care about the fight or not, or even sports in general, it is clear to see the bias in some of these sources, and we must be wary of bias in any news story. Now we have covered the game, the fight, and the fallout from the fight. We have done a quick recap of the media coverage showing that this event was reported on by both college media, mainstream sports media, and mainstream media in general, and we've dissected each of these sources for any bias. Despite this being a fairly straightforward non-political story, it is clear to see some bias in its reporting, particularly by the Collegian. I hope this speech has not only informed you on the event, but also shown you that bias can creep into coverage of any story, even something as harmless as a basketball game. Thank you.